Is Dirty Harry Callahan the first character that we think of? Maybe. But maybe the first character that we think of is National Geographic photographer Robert Kincaid, Bridges in Madison County. Secret Service agent Frank Horrigan. We think of, if we're boomers or Gen Xers, is William Money in Unforgiven.
Right turn, Clyde.
Or even maybe we think of Philo Beddoe. Right turn, Clyde. Right turn, Clyde. And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 200 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. My throat's almost all the way back. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. Well, as luck would have it, a kind of double centennial episode of 200 coincides with, in about 3 hours and 35 minutes, it will be the 94th birthday of my single favorite person to ever work in the movie business. And that would be Clint Eastwood Jr., otherwise known as Clint, who was born May 31st, 1930. And he has been a major player in Hollywood for 60 years. He was already in his 30s when he became a movie star, per se. He had been on a TV show called Rawhide, which is how he initially gained fame. So he's not somebody like a Tom Cruise who came out of the box and within a couple of years just sort of blew up. Clint worked in the business for quite some time before he more or less hit it big, if you want to use that kind of old school phrase. But there are these small little roles that he had before anyone knew who he was. And you can see it. The seeds being planted. There's something different about this guy. There's something different about the way he stands, about the way he engages with the other actors and actresses. I believe he was 26 and he had a guest shot on the old Brett Maverick TV series starring his friend and later co-star 40-something years later in Space Cowboys, James Garner, a.k.a. the old guy in The Notebook for anyone under 30. That's how you know who James Garner is, the old guy in The Notebook. Ryan Gosling all grown up. Supposed to be him, I think. Yeah. Clint had a guest shot on the Brett Maverick TV series. I think, was it called Duel at Sundown? But he basically plays a heavy, and he spends most of the episode threatening James Garner's somewhat comical lead, Brett Maverick. And then Maverick kind of bluffs and tricks him into kind of backing down. And the episode is just okay. And I only saw it because when I got the 2-disc kind of collector's edition DVD for Unforgiven, the 2 discs weren't just information on the film. Not that there would have been anything wrong with that. But there was a lot of information on Clint's career and certain things that he had done that maybe we weren't aware of, or films that he produced, people he worked with. And as an almost Easter egg, they included this 22-minute episode of Brett Maverick TV series from when Clint was, he was pretty much grad school age at the time. So once he was able to make the transition to film stardom, and it's a long, convoluted story, but the Cliff Notes version is that thanks to the success of Rawhide, he was given an opportunity to work with Quentin Tarantino's favorite filmmaker, Sergio Leone. Leone's greatest works hadn't happened yet. And Clint, in, I want to say it was 1963 that he got the gig, was offered a role in a Western, a so-called spaghetti Western, called spaghetti Western, not because, as I thought when I was a kid, oh, the films have a consistency of spaghetti, there's not much to them. No, they're called spaghetti Westerns because they're shot in Italy and they're funded with Italian money. It's more on the nose than you think. It's level 1, and even as a kid, I was on level 3 or level 4 trying to figure out what everything meant. But Clint Eastwood went off to Italy, he was 32, 33 at the time, to shoot a movie called The Magnificent Stranger. Had a good time, made good money, got along famously with Leone, and the guys hoped to work together again, which they did twice more. And Clint came home and honestly thought the film sucked. He was sort of a loose remake of the Japanese, I guess it was a Kurosawa film, Yojimbo, if I'm not mistaken. And Clint, he wasn't sure that it was any good. He said, "No, I see what Sergio was trying to do. There's a lot of operatic camera movements and some virtuoso stuff, but I don't think the film is any good." So he came home and he kind of put it in the rearview mirror and went back to work on Rawhide or whatever it was he was doing. He did a couple of other films kind of below the radar around that time frame, one called The Witches. Sometime after he finished work on Magnificent Stranger, got a call from his agent. His agent's really excited. "You're not going to believe this. A Fistful of Dollars is tearing up the box office." Okay. That's great for whoever made it. What are you calling me with that for? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. What's A Fistful of Dollars? His agent is a kind of an iconic guy named Lenny Hershan. He says, "Clint, the film that you shot in Italy." Clint says, "What, The Magnificent Stranger?" "No, they're not calling it that. Didn't somebody tell you they retitled it A Fistful of Dollars?" Well, that somebody should have been the agent. Clint had no idea his film that he had shot opened. But 60 plus years ago, information traveled at a snail's pace. This is something I bring up a lot, but it bears repeating. This could never have happened in the last 15 or 20 years, maybe not even 30, because information started to move so much quicker. But there were limited people who had access to, oh, this film is called A Fistful of Dollars, not what they used for the shooting title. Nowadays, in 2 minutes, everybody in Hollywood would know. So Fistful of Dollars became a big success. And then Sergio Leone and Clint made for a few dollars more. And that was a big success. And that led to a movie that many consider to this day to be one of the 2 or 3 greatest Westerns in the history of cinema, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I certainly have it in the top 5. Now, I'm in a little bit of a weird position here because I am a Western film scholar, but I haven't seen as many Westerns as other general film fans who just happen to have seen a lot of Westerns. But I've seen and studied the generally acknowledged to be greats, including films like Ride the High Country, The Wild Bunch, those are both Sam Peckinpah, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, which I think might be Leone's masterpiece, Unforgiven, Outlaw Josie Wales, and then the Costner films like Dances with Wolves and Open Range with Robert Duvall, which I think is just a great film. But The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly elevated Clint further. And then he moved away from Westerns, but he kept the Western ethos. So he did a film with Don Siegel. And his friendship with Don Siegel and his working relationship with Don Siegel would prove to be every bit as lucrative and productive for Clint's overall career as his working relationship with Sergio Leone. Now, if you want me to say Sergio Leone was a better filmmaker than Don Siegel, okay, that's not an insult on Don Siegel. Tarantino would say Sergio Leone was a better filmmaker than all but a handful of people who ever worked in the medium. It's not really a criticism. I think that Tarantino would actually put Leone above Kubrick and Hitchcock if I'm reading some of his statements right. But the idea is Clint met Don Siegel, who had been a montage maker in the early days. He worked on Casablanca, among other all-time classics. And then he started making his own films. And in the 50s, he did the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is an absolute masterpiece. Hands down, top 5 best science fiction films ever made. The original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The Donald Sutherland, the remake, terrific. Even the one with Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman is okay. Abel Ferrara did one, okay. But the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers is spectacular. So Clint worked with Don Siegel, and they did this movie called, they did Two Mules for Sister Sarah, but they did a movie called Coogan's Bluff. And this is where I was getting at with the Western thing. It's an urban Western, Clint's character is an Arizona lawman. Where he starts the film looks like the Old West of the classic Westerns, the John Ford, Howard Hawks, Red River, The Searchers, Monument Valley, that kind of thing. And then it shifts to New York. And it's a sort of comment or a commentary at the time and now that Clint was evolving. And part of his evolution was he could do something other than star in Westerns. He could be in a cop drama, which early it takes the form of a Western and then kind of goes in a totally different direction. It becomes more or less a manhunt. And Clint's character is a bit of a ladies' man. He gets a little action here, a little there. And it's some pretty inappropriate stuff. But by the time the original Dirty Harry came out, also directed by Don Siegel, Clint was already on the cusp of being the biggest star in Hollywood. So he was already a big star by the time Dirty Harry was in the pipeline and into production. But when Dirty Harry hit and it became huge box office and controversial, lightning rod for criticism and praise, this movie, the sort of 2024 commentary on the olden days. People think that everything was allowed and people were less sensitive and nobody gave a shit. That's totally untrue. Not even close. What's different is that less people had a big microphone and megaphone to get their thoughts across. But when Dirty Harry landed, there were substantial numbers of critics that said the film was outright fascist, should not be shown. It's disgusting that movies like this can be made. Pauline Kael, she didn't say it's disgusting that a film like this could be made, but she argued that the film was basically taking a fascist position. Now, I don't really believe that, but she wasn't the only critic who said it. There were critics who said the film takes a very hardcore position here. I don't even agree with that, but Roger Ebert was one critic who thought the film was terrific, but he said, if you're asking me to dissect its politics, I really don't want to. I'm not comfortable doing that. So there were a ton of people that had huge problems with that film from the perspective of, well, what really goes on here? Now, I can argue from any angle. I don't think that the film is a fascist text. I think that the movie is arguing that Harry Callahan, while he may get screwed by the system, he's not necessarily right. No one is right. And the title of the original book, Dead Right, has about 5 or 6 different meanings. But in the world of that film, nobody is dead right. Everyone makes mistakes, and you kind of flip a coin. Should this person have equal whatever? But I don't see the film as, if I just watched the movie, I wouldn't have thought it was going to be that controversial. Well, I get it. I mean, I got into arguments in film school about this movie. I wrote 3 papers on it. But the idea is that Clint was already taking risks. He didn't have to make a film which would become a lightning rod, which would be shine light. People say, well, maybe this guy, maybe he's some whack job. Maybe he thinks he's really Dirty Harry. But he started, even though he knew he was going to make a sequel, he began to do different things. Previously, he did a movie called Paint Your Wagon, which was a musical Western. It's terrible, but it showed that he was willing to take risks. He worked with Richard Burton in the late 60s in a terrific film called Where Eagles Dare. Broadsword calling Danny Boy, come in, Danny Boy. Broadsword calling. Just listening to Richard Burton say the lines, broadsword calling Danny Boy, come in, Danny Boy. Boy, Burton was really something. And Clint loved Richard Burton. Got to hang out with Elizabeth Taylor, and that's a great movie. But in that movie, Burton is kind of the lead. And Clint, as a rising star, and that was a little bit before Dirty Harry, he was always willing to give his co-stars, or in that case, the star, give them the room to shine. He was so many people have said this, he's a very generous actor, meaning he doesn't deliberately hog the limelight. He's just somebody that when the camera is on him, camera loves him, and he just commands attention by the way he stands on screen. John Wayne, same thing. John Wayne's not a great actor, but John Wayne could hold a close-up, especially if he was in the right role in the right film, like The Searchers. There are moments where it's just John Wayne in close-up, and it's great cinema. But Clint was already taking risks. He was not playing safe. There were a lot of movies that he made as the 70s moved forth where they were arduous productions. He simply wanted to try. He wanted to do it because it was different. He made a movie. I talked about Cliffhanger on the channel 3 days ago for its 31st anniversary. Now, Cliffhanger was mistakenly referred to as a mountain climbing film. It's not really a mountain climbing film. It's Die Hard on a Mountain is more accurate. It's Rocky or Rambo more so Rocky than Rambo on a mountain, Underdog. Clint made a mountain climbing film in the mid-1970s when the world didn't know that it needed a mountain climbing film. It's an adaptation of a novel by a famous thriller writer. I want to say the guy was French, who went by Trevanian. And the plot isn't really, it's spy skullduggery. Clint's playing almost an American James Bond, but it's not really a very exciting film unless you love mountain climbing, in which case it is. Clint learned how to climb. He was already in his mid-40s. He learned how to climb. And there are scenes in that movie where he's on the Eiger. He's thousands of feet in the air. There's no green screen. And this is not a knock on Stallone. Stallone was protected all throughout the filming of Cliffhanger. Hey, he's afraid of heights. I'm afraid of heights too. You have trouble getting me 20 feet up in the air. But Clint did his own climbing. Yes, there was a stuntman and another stuntman who unfortunately died in a terrible tragedy of a rock slide. It could have been Clint. But the guy the gears were always turning. He never took a movie off. He was always trying to do something different. And another thing that Clint Eastwood did, which the Tom Cruises of the day will talk about, and Will Smith, that Clint kind of paved the way, he formed his own production company on the Warner Brothers lot in the late 1960s. And people told him, you don't need to do this, Clint. I think this is a mistake. Or, I think this is a bad step for you. So Clint doesn't seem like a kind of guy who would necessarily be the quickest wit. I don't think he very much appreciated people telling him he was making a mistake. He was taking a bad step. He named his production company, which still exists to this day, Malpaso Productions, translating from Espanol, bad step. Turned out to be anything but a bad step. It allowed him a greater level of creative control than any other actor-director had had. This is now more than 50 years ago. And thanks to Don Siegel, his second favorite filmmaker behind Sergio Leone, and Siegel's influence, it was Don Siegel who convinced Clint to try his hand at directing. And I'm sure there are plenty of times where filmmakers take an actor under their wing, maybe with Bradley Cooper when he was working with Clint in The Mule, and maybe in American Sniper. Clint said, Bradley, you've got a great eye, you could do this. But it doesn't always pan out that way. It turned out that Bradley Cooper is a great filmmaker, that he did have the eye, and he did have the patience for it, because not everybody does. But Don Siegel believed that Clint had the patience to be a filmmaker, and that he thought big. He was not just a robotic action star. He wasn't just the man with no name blowing shit up real good, or Dirty Harry Callahan roughing everybody up and hating everyone equally. He doesn't play any favorites. He hates everyone equally. Okay. But Clint started directing, and he did a movie called Breezy in 1973 with William Holden, who was unfortunately somebody who looked way older than he was. Talk about living hard. He lived really hard. But William Holden was one of the first people to say just how terrific Clint was. And he agreed to do it because he liked him, but he was not expecting that this guy was actually a craftsman. And he said, I don't know that I've ever worked with a director who gave me as much room and as much leeway as Clint. And I think it's because he's an actor first that he gets it from both sides of the camera. And I would work with him again anytime he would want. And as the 70s went forth, because he directed The Eiger Sanction, that was a brutal production. I mean, half of the footage at least is shot on the mountain. And there's a sequence where Clint's character of, what a dumb name, Jonathan Hemlock. I mean, can't you do better? Jonathan Hemlock, that was his name. I would say in history, no one has ever looked less like a Jonathan Hemlock than Clint Eastwood. But there's a moment in the film, and the famous climber of today, Alex Honnold, has talked about this. He's discussed, he has on his Instagram, his blog, he likes to talk about mountain climbing in movies. And there is a scene in The Eiger Sanction where it appears that Clint has ascended the Eiger. I don't know how they did it. There was some kind of trick photography There's no way he did that on his own. At least I don't think. But it's thrilling, and the scenes of him on the mountain are amazing. Even if the movie as a whole, the spy stuff it's not really that exciting. But he continued to do both, act and direct. Sometimes just direct. And, I could talk about this guy for an hour, but we don't have that kind of time. His output didn't really slow until very recently. And unfortunately, sometimes you don't get the best projects. The movie that he made about a terrorist takeover on a train, that one wasn't very good. I forgot the name of that. And then he did the Richard Jewell movie, which was praised in some quarters, but then in other areas they felt, it wasn't really that great. And I saw The Mule, which was before the Richard Jewell film. And let me see what the name of that movie, the movie that he made about the takeover on the train. I don't know why I'm having trouble remembering the name of that one. I want to say 310 to Yuma, but it's not 310 to Yuma. Excuse me. I didn't like Cry Macho. Cry Macho was a project that so many people in Hollywood circled for decades, and it just wasn't that good. It just wasn't that good. And it's difficult for me to say that it wasn't that good, but it just wasn't. Hold on, let me get this. Before I forget, the 1517 to Paris, and that was in 2018, where he also did The Mule. Right, he didn't appear in that film. Cry Macho was circled by so many people from Arnold Schwarzenegger on down, and the story just wasn't good enough to justify the big budget and Clint in the lead, and there's nothing wrong with his performance, and I really love what he does in The Mule, and he and Diane Wiest. It's aching stuff. But he slowed down because he's turning 94 in a couple of hours. But you look at his output, the fact that he's still working. And there was a lot of controversy because the Warner Brothers head, David Zaslav, was aggravated that the previous regime had commissioned Cry Macho because their explanation to him when he was running through the numbers and some of the successes and failures, he just wanted an accounting of what were the thoughts on this and what were the normal stuff. And the creative executive made a mistake and he didn't answer Zaslav correctly. He should have said, we just thought the film was going to be a hit because of Clint and we loved the story. But for whatever reason, the one executive or a couple of executives, what they told Zaslav was something closer to, we thought we owed it to him, indicating they didn't believe in the project as it was going to go before the cameras with the cast and the budget. They probably thought what Arnold Schwarzenegger had thought 20-some years ago, maybe even been more, where he said, this is not a big budget film. I don't like what they're trying to do here. This is something that should be shot independently. Arnold didn't say all of that, but that was his thought. This is not a big budget movie. This isn't going to work if they try to make this a $50 million production. So it didn't look like Clint was going to make any more movies because Zaslav, who hadn't worked with him, but his reaction to what he was told, he was really pissed off. And he had just gotten there. And he said some stuff he shouldn't have said. He was right, but he shouldn't have said it. Where he basically said, I didn't appreciate what they told me. I don't like what I learned about the previous regime. This is not show friends. It's show business. And he's not wrong, but I understand why they told him the truth, even though they shouldn't have. It's because it was Clint. And Clint is one of a handful of people who helped build Warner Brothers into what it is today. And that's the part that Zaslav, who was a businessman first, he loves movies, and he didn't accidentally luck into that position. He was with MSNBC, and he did a huge overhaul. This is not a dumb guy. This guy is brilliant, but he's also not afraid to ruffle feathers. But he took a lot of heat for his comments about what he seemed to be shading Clint. And a lot of people basically told him, can't do that, David. You can't. This is a living legend, an icon. You know it as well as anybody. And you also know how much fucking money he made for the studio that you now are running and this company that you're now running. Steve Ross is long gone. The old regime of Warner, long gone. Show a little respect, okay? Now, nobody said that publicly, but behind closed doors, you got to do something. You got to make this right. You got to let the guy do it, whatever they said. And then Zaslav put out a press release saying, I met with Clint. He's ready to go. He has a film that we're all excited about. And supposedly, Juror Number 2, which is completed, there was some talk that it might premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, but that didn't happen. It wasn't quite ready. But sometime later this year, and that will be his final film. It's like he doesn't know and never knew and never could know how to retire. In a different way than his buddy Stallone, Clint is very restless and never satisfied. And he's not that kind of nervous, twitchy, fidgety personality that Stallone is, because people who've been on sets with Clint can sit and read and sit and do nothing but sip on a cup of coffee while he's going over dailies. He can be at rest while working. Stallone can't stop moving. Michael Caine said we made Victory. He said I couldn't get the guy to stop moving. It was fucking stupid. Same thing when they did Get Carter. He's always in motion. He can't sit still. Clint can sit still. But he never wanted to stop working. He's always felt as if he had more to say. And even though some of his movies, and he had that stretch in the late 80s into the early 90s where most of his films disappointed at the box office or with critics, and sometimes both, but there were movies like White Hunter, Black Heart that had a hardcore of critics, such as Rex Reed in that case and Roger Ebert, that thought the film was one of the best of its year. But it came out and just died at the box office, and there were other critics that said it doesn't quite get there. It doesn't quite get there. He made a movie called Bird about Charlie Parker, the famous jazz musician, played by Forrest Whitaker. It got a ton of acclaim. I think Forrest might have won a Best Actor at Cannes. It got a ton of acclaim. Nobody went to see it, and it really didn't do very much. Maybe it was one or two kind of courtesy Oscar nominations. But once Clint made the comeback with Unforgiven, and obviously I'm going to be skipping over a ton of stuff here, he's been a major figure since then, with the exception of the time period in between Cry Macho and when he was allowed to get things together for his last film, Juror Number 2, which is going to be with Nicholas Hoult and Kiefer Sutherland and I believe Toni Collette. I'm not sure who else is in the cast. I'm pretty sure about those three. And it sounds great. And people at Warner's who've seen early rushes and maybe a kind of a rough cut that's not quite completed, they're supposedly really excited. Not so much Oscar bait, although Nicholas Hoult certainly has gotten a lot of acclaim in his career, as has Toni Collette for that matter, supporting actress nomination for The Sixth Sense. But the sense is the movie is going to be a hit because it's a great premise and the actors are terrific. And I'm sure Clint, he had to have help directing this film. He's 93 for crying out loud. But his mom made it past 100. You know, he's got good genetics. We know that. He got great genetics. Man, the fact that he's still working 25 years after most people would be retired. I mean, Sean Connery was retired at 72. He's a little older than Clint, maybe a month or so. And Gene Hackman, who's 4 months older than Clint, he's been retired for 20 years. Clint Eastwood, the man from Malpaso, the man with no name, my favorite person to ever work in the movie business. Now, before I close, I'm going to try, off the top of my head, I'm going to name my five favorite Clint Eastwood films, not in any order, that he simply starred in or produced, but didn't direct. Let's put it that way, okay? The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Dirty Harry, Escape from Alcatraz, Heartbreaker. Oh, he directed Heartbreaker. Oh, In the Line of Fire. Okay? And I'm going to need another movie probably from the 70s. You know what? Any Which Way You Can. Right Turn, Clyde. Right Turn, Clyde. 5 best movies that he directed that he starred in as well. Bridges of Madison County. Play Misty for Me. Unforgiven. Heartbreak Ridge, Perfect World, super underrated, Kevin Costner. And my favorite films that he directed but did not appear in, I mean, American Sniper, right? We love that. What a great movie. Sully with Tom Hanks, fantastic. That's a film a lot of people slept on. Man, Hanks is good in that movie. So those are two. And the movie with Charlie Parker called Birdie is really, really good. It's an absolute home run. The movie they did, Jersey Boys, the film version, it's okay. I don't know that I would put that in my, in my top. But, yeah, I mean, Pink Cadillac really wasn't very good. I like true crime. It's not great, but for a kind of mystery with some suspense elements, Dennis Leary is fucking awesome, and James Woods too. I like true crime. Oh, I have to mention Absolute Power, which he also directed. That is a great movie, a phenomenal adaptation by William Goldman from David Baldacci's novel, a very underrated adaptation. But that's a Clint Eastwood movie. So before I close, I'm sorry. If people ask me to name, like let's say somebody says, I know who he is, I understand he's an important figure, I've heard of a lot of his movies, I've never seen anything. What are some Clint Eastwood movies that you would recommend to people who have never seen a Clint Eastwood film? Absolute Power is one of those movies because he was in his mid-60s. It has action elements, it has mystery elements and thriller elements, and it's a kind of film that is very accessible. It was on Netflix about 6 or 8 months ago, and people who were stumbling onto it for the first time, it was on Twitter or X, they're like, this is fantastic, I didn't even know this movie existed. But certainly Absolute Power would be one, Dirty Harry would be another, In the Line of Fire would be another, and I'm going to throw Heartbreak Ridge out there too, because Clint was a little younger, he was in his mid-50s, very physically intimidating, and that movie is just an absolute rip. So, in 3 hours and 5 minutes on the East Coast, happy 94th birthday to the extraordinary, stupendous, triple threat. Well, sometimes he did the music. We'll just say he's a double threat. A phenomenal filmmaker and a great movie star and not a bad actor. He definitely got better as he got older. I would say that his best film performances for me, as far as range, definitely in the 90s. And I think that the film which shows the greatest range is In the Line of Fire, the movie that he made with Rene Russo and John Malkovich about a Secret Service agent trying to thwart presidential assassin. 30 years after he failed to protect JFK. Happy birthday. Happy 94th to Clinton Eastwood Jr., and I hope as many more as humanly possible. This has been episode 200 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday evening with me here in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 201 real soon. Till then, right turn, Clyde. Peace.